They told J.D. Vance to leave, expecting him to get angry. His response left the whole diner in silence. J.D. Vance pulled into the dusty lot of Harper's Grill, a weathered roadside stop off a two-lane road in Marion, Kentucky. It was the sort of place that had weathered years without fanfare, its chipped green signs swaying gently, the smell of fried chicken and sweet tea sneaking out each time the weathered screen door swung open. He'd caught wind of it from a gas station cashier that morning who'd bragged about their cornbread and coleslaw like it was a local secret. J.D. was worn thin. A marathon day of campaign stops, grip and grins, and tense exchanges had left him craving nothing more than a hot meal and a moment's peace before the drive back. A tinny bell clanged as he stepped inside. The grill was snug but homey, at least at first glance, the kind of joint where locals staked out their favorite tables, and a row of grainy photos taped behind the counter chronicled years of fry cooks and loyal patrons. The air hung heavy with the scent of frying oil, smoked ham, and brewing tea, underscored by the soft drone of voices. J.D. locked eyes with the waitress behind the counter. Her tentative smile faded as recognition hit. It was quick, a split-second shift, but he clocked it. A pause, her jaw tightening, as if she wasn't sure how to proceed. He took in the room. A few heads swiveled his way. A grizzled man with a fork full of mashed potatoes muttered to his table-mate. A woman in a quilted vest lowered her iced tea glass a little too firmly, her gaze sharpening before flicking away. J.D. wasn't oblivious. He'd walked into enough spaces to feel when the air turned lukewarm, but a small-town grill? The waitress wavered, then stepped forward, smoothing her apron with unsteady hands. "Evening," she said, her voice cautious. "You here to eat or just picking up?" J.D. gave a tired half-smile. "Eating, if that's all right." Her hesitation lingered, too long for a routine ask. She said, glancing toward the kitchen pass-through. "Give me a sec to check something." She ducked behind a faded curtain, leaving J.D. standing there. More eyes drifted his way. A guy at the counter adjusted his cap. A low grumble escaped someone's throat. The mood was shifting, and it wasn't friendly. Time stretched. Beyond the curtain, hushed voices ebbed and flowed, too faint to catch. J.D. exhaled, easing his stance. He wasn't jumping to judgment. Maybe it was a table mix-up. Maybe they were slammed. Maybe. The waitress reappeared, her spine straighter now, her resolve set. "Sorry, sir," she said, her tone firmer. "We can't serve you tonight." The way she delivered it, the way the room seemed to brace around her words, made it plain. This wasn't about logistics. It was pointed. For a beat, J.D. Vance said nothing. The declaration lingered, thick and unyielding. No clarification needed. The grill quieted. Not fully still, but hushed enough. The pop of the fryer hummed on. A glass tapped a tabletop, but the buzz of talk had dimmed. People were watching, waiting. J.D. sized up the waitress's face. She wasn't venomous, just resolute, like she'd settled on this. Or someone had settled it for her. His gaze slid past her to the kitchen window, where a couple of line cooks hovered near a stack of orders, their faces blank. He cleared his throat. "Sorry, did I miss something?" The waitress didn't waver this time. "It's just we'd rather not have you tonight. No rules about it, no kitchens closing, just that." J.D. rested his hands on his hips, breathing out through his nose. He'd navigated plenty of prickly spots, debates rigged to rattle him, interviews meant to snag a soundbite. But this, being turned away from a no-frills grill, hit different. A throat cleared nearby. J.D. glanced over, catching the eye of a wiry older woman at a table. She looked like a regular, her denim jacket patched at the elbows, fingers curled around a spoon. She shook her head slightly, more to herself, then scooped up another bite of soup. Across the room, a man in a faded ball cap shifted, his face a mask. Beside him, a stocky guy in his 40s leaned back, arms folded, like he was settling in for a scene. J.D. took it in, the glances that darted away when he met them, the ones that held too long, the ones tinged with a quiet glee. The moment's weight bore down. He had choices: walk out, shrug it off, let it slide, push for answers, call it out, hint at how this could play online by dawn, test their resolve, see if they'd double down knowing who he was, a U.S. Senator. Instead, he picked none of those. "All right," he said. nodding slowly, his voice level, deliberate. Can I talk to whoever's in charge? That threw a few off balance. The waitress faltered, her eyes flicking to the kitchen as if seeking a cue. The older woman muttered something low. A guy by the door let out a dry chuckle, like he couldn't believe JD was digging in. JD just stood, patient. The waitress slipped behind the curtain again. A few beats passed, a sip of tea, a plate scraped. Then the curtain parted and a man in his late 40s emerged. Stocky, arms folded over a flour-dusted apron, his name tag read Cal. Cal didn't ask what JD wanted. He gave him a once-over and said, "Heard you've got a question?" His tone gruff, more dare than greeting. JD Vance met Cal's look, steady, unblinking. He wasn't here to bicker or flex, but he wasn't leaving without a why. "Yeah," JD said, "I'd like to know why I can't sit down." Cal snorted, a short puff through his nose like he'd braced for this but didn't relish it. He rubbed his hands on his apron, casting a quick glance at the scattered onlookers. Some feigned disinterest, others didn't hide their stares. "Listen," Cal said, planting his feet. "This ain't about you, not exactly." JD arched a brow. "Feels like it is." Cal's mouth twitched. He scratched his jaw, then sighed. "Folks here got their thoughts about you, what you're about. I've got a place to keep running, and I don't need a mess." JD nodded, digesting that. "And me eating here's a mess?" Cal didn't reply right off. He looked toward the counter where the older woman sipped her soup slower now. Over by the wall, the stocky guy still watched, arms crossed, like this was prime viewing. JD knew this dance. Not this exact step, but close enough. It wasn't just one call, it was the meaning behind it, the optics, the fallout. It was the unspoken push from every corner, the kind that nudged someone into a choice they might not even fully back. He eyed Cal again. "Straight up, do you buy into this, or is it just to keep things smooth?" Cal paused. His grip tightened on his apron's edge, and for a flash, JD caught a hint of doubt, like maybe Cal wasn't as solid on this as he let on. But before he could speak, the stocky guy piped up with a bark of a laugh. "Oh, come off it," he said, shaking his head. "It's not complicated. You're not wanted here. End of story." JD turned, sizing him up. He had the air of someone itching for a scrap, waiting to stir the pot. JD didn't take the bait. He shifted back to Cal. "I'll go if that's what you really want." The offer hung there, a lifeline, room for Cal to breathe, rethink, push against whatever tide had swept this up. Cal's eyes darted to the kitchen, then back. "I don't want a scene," he said at last. JD nodded. "Me neither." For a long stretch, neither moved. JD could have bailed, shaken his head, walked off, let it fade. He could have dialed up a storm, made it a headline, let the web spin it wild. But instead, he did the unexpected. He pulled out a chair, sat, and said, "Then let's figure it out." The room stiffened. JD didn't slam anything, didn't posture. He just settled in, hands on the table, like time was no issue. This wasn't how these things went here. Standoffs usually fizzled fast, someone bolting or clamming up, but not this. Cal stared, then exhaled long and slow. "Figure it out," he echoed, like the idea was foreign. JD shrugged. "You don't want me here, I hear you. I just don't get why. So let's sort it." A gruff laugh rolled from the stocky guy. "This dude's got guts." JD let it slide. Cal tugged the chair opposite JD, not sitting, just leaning on it, forearms braced on the back. His apron bore faint grease streaks, remnants of a day's work. "I've got a business," Cal said at last. "I don't start trouble. I don't want buzz, but I've got folks to look out for." JD nodded. "Okay, so what do these folks think of me?" Cal's glance swept the room, almost expecting someone to jump in. The waitress fidgeted near the coffee pot. The older woman's spoon hovered, still. Then Cal faced him. "They don't trust suits, don't buy into promises, and some stuff you've backed, it rubs them wrong." JD eased back. "That's fair, but you don't know me, right?" Cal faltered. "Not face to face, no." "So tell me," JD pressed, "if I was just some stranger off the road, not a name you've heard, Would this be happening? Quiet. JD let it sit, watching Cal's face flicker. Not a big shift, but a crack. Then the stocky guy snorted. It's not about fame, pal. It's knowing what you're really like. JD turned. And what's that? The guy grinned, relishing the spotlight. You're the type who talks up the little guy but plays the same old power game. JD nodded, mulling it over. All right, he said. So what should I have done different? The guy blinked, not the comeback he'd braced for. You're not welcome, JD went on. I get it, but you've got the stage. Say your piece. The grill went still. No clatter, no hiss, just silence. Cal rubbed his jaw. Didn't see this coming tonight. JD gave a faint, worn smile. Same here. For the first time, the standoff wasn't pure friction. It edged towards something else, a sliver of connection. The place wasn't just hushed now, it was tuned in. Even the sideliners peeked over their cups. JD sat steady, waiting. The stocky guy, arms still crossed, looked primed to jab again, but a flicker of doubt crossed him, maybe because JD wasn't firing back, just listening. Cal, hands on the chair, let out a breath. You want to hear it? He shook his head. They think you're all talk. JD didn't twitch, just tilted his head, weighing it. They figure you preach about regular folks, but you're still in the suit game, making promises that don't stick, same as the rest. And they hold on to that. Cal huffed through his nose. They don't let it go. JD nodded slowly. I can see that. The stocky guy scoffed. That's it? JD turned. What else you want? The guy sat up. I don't know, man. Fight, explain, something. JD rested his forearms on the table. You decided who I was before I stepped in. You wanted a blow-up, a showdown to prove your point. The guy's jaw slackened, no words coming. JD pressed on, calm. What if I said I felt that same grind? He looked to California. You say nothing changes. I've lived that, grown up in it. Saw neighbors stuck, felt stuck myself. Sure, I climbed out, did what folks didn't predict, but that doesn't erase where I started. Cal's fingers drummed the chair. He didn't brush it off. He looked pensive. JD swept the room. You don't have to buy my line. I'm not here to flip your views. But I came in for a bite, not a soapbox. A beat. Then the older woman at the table grumbled. Pitiful when a fella can't grab a plate. The edge softened. A few smirked. Cal chuckled low, shaking his head. JD turned back. So where we at? Cal ran a hand over his face, glanced at the kitchen, then at JD. Here's the deal, he said finally. You stay? We hash this out. If I don't peg you as just another smooth talker by the end, maybe I'll get you a plate. JD nodded, a faint grin tugging his lips. Fair enough. For the first time that night, the divide blurred. It felt less like a wall, more like a talk.